Good evening. I am Karen Taylor, Program Director of the General Society of Mechanics and Tradesmen, and I'm so pleased to welcome both our in-person and our online audience to tonight's very special presentation, Rambusch, the first 100 years, 1898 to 1998, with Viggo Rambusch, CEO Emeritus, and Edwin Rambusch, co-owner, president, and CEO of the Rambusch Company. And what a pleasure to have you both here this evening. Now, you're going to hear the story of an extraordinary company founded in 1898, a company who specialize in the decorative arts, light, stained glass, mosaics, and restoration. The story is encapsulated in a wonderful book, Rambusch, the first 100 years, 1898 to 1998, that just happens to be available for purchase this evening. And our in-person audience will be able to purchase at the end of the talk at the far end of the room. Now, there are many people to thank tonight, in particular, the whole Rambusch family, and that includes Viggo, Edwin, Martin, and Kristen, as well as the Rambusch staff, Demetra and Kevin. Rambusch have also provided, sadly only for our in-person audience, a wonderful assortment of wine and cheese for the post-lecture reception. I also want to express our appreciation for the support of the New York Landmarks Conservancy and welcome their members here this evening, as well, of course, as our own members and lecture supporters. We have a special window display to celebrate tonight's program by our artistic window curator, Thomas Donoghue, which I encourage you to all look at before you leave this evening. It's on the left side of the building in a westerly direction. For those of you who may be less familiar with the General Society, a brief introduction. The General Society of Mechanics and Tradesmen of the City of New York was founded in 1785 by the skilled craftsmen of New York City. Today, our 240-year-old organization continues to serve and improve the quality of life for the people of the City of New York through our educational and cultural programs. These include our tuition-free Mechanics Institute, our over 200-year-old library, of course, of which we're situated in this evening for the in-person audience, the John M. Mossman Locke Museum, which you're welcome to visit after the lecture tonight, which is upstairs, and finally, our nearly 200-year-old lecture series, of course, of which this is part of this evening. Normally at this point, I would share the bios of our speakers, but tonight there is no need, as Viggo and Edwin will share the Rambusch Company extraordinary history. Please join me in welcoming Viggo and Edwin Rambusch. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we begin tonight, I thought I should share a few words and try to give a little structure to today's discussion. As you would imagine, with fathers and sons, we might have started with a plan and a structure, which quickly changed when we arrived to say, maybe we just ad-lib a little bit. So we'll try to follow this a little bit, but first I would be remiss not to thank Victoria, Karen, and Angelo for welcoming us to this wonderful setting. Rambusch has had a relationship with the General Society of Mechanics and Trades since 1911, so it's quite fitting for tonight's discussion. I'd like to offer a few words and try to frame tonight's discussion. The first section we will look at is who was and is Rambusch. The portion of tonight's images will explore who Rambusch was and who we are today as a firm that's been shaped by a changing world and the evolving nature of craft. We'll cover some brief historical overview, some key insightful projects, and the evolution of the company's work. Then we'll talk about the book, which is really part of why we're here, the purpose of the book, the highlights and stories captured in its pages, and the new role in documenting and preserving the firm's history. As Dad said, I could do 100 hours, 100 days. We're trying to get down to 20 minutes. So please forgive us for being a little brief on some of these, but hopefully you can enjoy some of the stories along the way. And then the third portion is, how does Rambusch continue from generation to generation? Our common core ideas and enduring values, family and the continuity of the firm, and perhaps most interesting, which is maybe a seminal idea, is the continuity of care. Who is our client? What is our job? And how can we carry it out to the best of our ability? So with that, I hope you join us, and thank you for making the time. So Dad, I will turn it over to you for a brief history of who Rambusch is. You have 8 minutes.
So, good evening. In 1898, two men came together. Mr. Henkin, he had just graduated from Princeton, and his family had money, and they wanted him to get some business experience. And through family connections, the decision was made that they would finance Frode Rambusch, and he would keep the books and learn the business. So that's half of the partnership, and then the other half was Frode. And Frode was at that point 39. He was a Danish immigrant. He had artistic talent as a young man. He went to the Royal Academy in Copenhagen and studied art and architecture. He became interested in architecture and worked in an architect's office for a while, and became particularly interested in painted decoration. And that was an art in itself back in the 19th century, as Jeff Green well knows. So they got together, and Frode had come over in 1889, went to work immediately for a firm in Brooklyn, started one or two smaller companies with a Mr. Pettit and Rambusch in Brooklyn, Pettit and Rambusch in New York, and then he was chief designer at Gibson Art Studio. And then he had built up connections and friends and following. And so when the two came together, it was like miraculous. There was a whole lot of work. Instantly, they were filled with work. Within months, there was a 40-man crew. Frode asked his brother-in-law to come over, which he did, and he became, Henrik Olsen became the superintendent, and they were at work. Almost miraculous. But Frode had built up a following as he moved around for those first 10 years. He had worked at a Catholic church, St. Anne's in Brooklyn, and that was a winner. And so he had a following with a father, he became Cardinal Farley. So Farley had a whole bunch of Irish friends, used to play poker together, and Frode did St. Jerome's in the Bronx, and did St. Raymond's in the Bronx, and St. John the Evangelist in New York, and St. Peter's in Staten Island, a whole series of the top Catholic churches in the city. He was working on Fifth Avenue, of course, and doing houses. But interesting that he was working in the Nickelodeons. Albert Zucker was a name that is in that path there. And so by 1909, he was doing the Jefferson Theater, which some of you would know, that's on 14th and I think it's 3rd or 2nd. And we were into theaters and movies were just coming into the theater. So you had vaudeville theaters, and then they started showing the movies in them, and then you ended up with movie theaters. Frode's son, Harold, went to Pratt Interior Design and came to work at the firm in 1914. He had gone to Europe and made his Wundershot, following his father, because Frode had worked in Vienna and Berlin and Dresden and all those great cities over the years, and Harold went and picked up to those companies. And then after the war, important is that the lighting in these spaces, whether it's a theater or a church, or in those beginning days, let's say turn of the century, was carbon filament lamps and gas, very low, gentle, nice light, comfortable light. And about 1904 to 5, the tungsten filament lamp replaces the carbon filament lamp. All of a sudden, it's 4 or 5 times brighter. And where they used to light Frode's murals with a carbon filament lamp, say, you hung an incandescent lamp in front of the mural, and you don't see the mural, you see the lamp. And he became very interested in lighting, and he started giving advice in 1902, 1904. It wasn't followed. So he, with some of his projects, sold the lighting fixtures with the decorative scheme so that it would be properly lighted. In other words, he made a shield, one of the first fixtures, and you hung an incandescent lamp down, and you hung a shield on the cord, simplistic, and painted the back of it white to throw the light on the mural, and put an alpha and an omega or some symbol on the front. So he sold these shields, and then he started making brackets to mount on the side wall, and he started making pendants, and he was making lighting fixtures with his friends, the blacksmiths and the coppersmiths in Brooklyn. You had the skilled metal workers who had emigrated from Sweden and Norway and Germany, and he got to know them, and they made his fixtures. Now, where I got to was in this war is over, and they received a serious commission to do the lighting in Scranton, at the cathedral in Scranton, and so they opened a shop, a metal shop. So the metal shop is opened in 1919. That's the second shop. You had a decorative painting studio with a superintendent, Henrik Olsen. You had the art metal shop starting in 1919. And of course, in every case, whether it's the lighting fixtures or the decorative scheme, there's a design room. And the designers, beginning with Frode, would make the sketches and the renderings, and that's what would sell the job, and you'd get a contract. So they were contractors, designers, and build is what it's called today, design build. So they made the designs of the lighting fixtures, the designs of the decorative scheme, and then sold that, and then had a crew that made it in the shop, that made the fixtures in the shop, or made the decorative painting on the walls and ceilings of the various spaces. So the 20s are boomtown. Theaters go law. King's Theater, we did some of the very big ones. The Palace in the Bronx, if you have somebody from the Bronx here. On 178th Street, I think it is, Grand Concourse. The King's in Brooklyn, that's out in the big King's complex in far reach of Brooklyn, and on and on. So we did these movie theaters, and we did the churches. And the churches moved on. The cathedral in Syracuse, the cathedral in Rochester, the cathedral in Buffalo, the cathedral in Erie. And we have relighted those. Now you still can do the cathedral in Erie. You haven't done that one yet. So, because he's following up, and the Rambusch replaces these fixtures. Once the units are in, we can just modify them and update them. A mural department is started in 27 with a young man from Yale who is the artist. And then in 1930, well, we had been designing in the papers of incorporation. New York, so we were incorporated in New York State. The papers of incorporation included decorative painting, lighting, and stained glass. So we did design some things. Some of the designers in the design room actually were from the firm in Berlin, which made stained glass windows, and we would design windows, and the firm in Berlin would make them. So that's in the later part of the 20s. So we opened a stained glass shop. So now you have the third shop in June of 1930. And we won an international competition right off. Bud Haley, wonderful artist, was aboard. He worked there for 40 years at Rambusch. And we won the Indianapolis War Memorial windows, 16 huge blue windows in that tower, if you know Indianapolis. And then we kept going in 31, 32. Those projects were all funded and financed and underway, though you had a crash in 29, eh? And Dad and Harold felt, oh, we're impervious. We're still all busy and everybody else is in trouble. How clever we are. But the secret was that those jobs, like the Empire State Building we worked in and the Waldorf Astoria, they were being worked on at that time. And so the crash for Rambusch came about 1932. And all of a sudden, it's pretty bad. What saved us through the mid-30s were fires. Churches had burned, they were insured, and they were rebuilt, and there was some work. 25th anniversary, 50th anniversary, 100th anniversary, a parish or a theater would get together and celebrate their 100th anniversary, and they'd refurbish the interior. That kept us going. And then the wonderful World's Fair. And we had a staff, so we were able to do a great deal of work in the World's Fair. And that's where the dragon comes from. So the dragon on the cover is sort of curious, but Hildreth Meyer, an artist that we worked with on many of her projects, designed for the medical and science building, medical arts and science and technology building at the World's Fair, a group of figures on the outside of the building, a torch of knowledge, and a nurse taking care of a patient, and they are working to drive the dragon of superstition out of the group. And so that's your dragon of superstition on the cover. And that was a catchy picture, so we put that on. Martin thought that would be a good picture on the cover. And then you have the war. So we did a great deal of work. The battleship Missouri and Iowa built in Brooklyn, eh? Battleship Missouri. I mean, think of the Brooklyn Navy Yard and building battleships in the Brooklyn Navy Yard, eh? And Sperry Rand got the commission to do the radar screens, but they needed somebody to fabricate them. So they really didn't have proper drawings. So we had the skill to do the shop drawings in the design room, and then we built a radar antenna. So on the top of the battleship Missouri is a radar antenna. We built blackout ventilators going back to the lighting was moving along very well in the early 20s, and they decided to have a separate department for lighting. And so the lighting was created as a separate department, so now you have four, right? You have art metal, you have lighting, you have stained glass, and you have decorative painting. And you have war coming. Then you have a terrific boom after the war, and a great number of churches being done and theaters being renovated. We come across, up to that point, the biggest contract of the firm was the East Capitol of the U.S. Capitol building, the East Front of the U.S. Capitol. Eisenhower has and protege Richard Nixon. We're under terrific pressure to get everything done for the Nixon inauguration on the East Front. That's where it will take place. And something happened. He didn't win the election, right? Kennedy won the election, and the steam went out of the project. It didn't matter whether we got it done in time for the inauguration. So that was fun to see. The church work continued until Vatican II. And I think we'll get into that when we come to some churches.
So I'm going to move us to a slide of the company. During our years, we've been in, I believe, 4 different locations. Had we just kept property in the 4 locations, we would be doing very well. We were on 5th Avenue, Greenwich Village, Clifton, New Jersey, and now Jersey City. But this is the place where we were for 50 years with the staff of people from that time. And as Dad mentioned, it's always a pleasure as we move through the history to see a project in which we have worked 2 or 3 times, sometimes 4. So we'll take a look here at the beginning of the slide on the right is Epiphany Church, which you can talk to a little bit.
Yeah, Epiphany is the first church in the diocese to be built following the Vatican II promulgations, the instructions. You remember, or some of you might not realize, that was a very tumultuous time for Roman Catholics. The Latin Mass, which was said facing the tabernacle and with the priest back to the congregation, stopped. It was no longer in Latin. It became English. Suddenly, I mean, within a year or 2, the whole thing is moving around. Now the priest is facing the congregation. So what are you doing with the altar? What are you doing with the ambo, etc.? And the congregation is thought of differently, not as an audience attending Mass. It is a congregation that is participating in the liturgies. So this Epiphany Church, which is our parish church, burned in December of '63. Kristen and I and Catha were walking home from a party that evening, and we saw the fire. The church was burned to the ground. Epiphany is the first church built following Vatican II. And we tried to work out where the tabernacle goes and the small baldachin to the side and various things like that. You see an altar there for concelebration. The idea that each priest would say a separate Mass was frowned upon. If there were 3 or 4 people saying Mass in the morning, they could stand around an altar and concelebrate together. I happened to be in the office, in the church, setting things up, when in comes a group of 4 or 5 men. I looked over, and I knew, because I had seen him and met him, that this was Wally Harrison of Harrison Abramovich. And I go over, and I say, "Oh, hello, Mr. Harrison, welcome. Is there anything I can do for you?" He said, "Hello, Mr. Rambusch." I was pleased, he knew my name. And we talked for about 10 or 15 minutes about Vatican II, and then I went back to work doing my thing, and he wandered around with his crew to find out just what a Catholic church was going to look like after Vatican II. Now that was 1967, 66, 67 that the church was finished. Cardinal Spellman came and dedicated it. Trinity, 10 years later, decides they're going to renovate. And Reverend Parks, who's a rector, knows Rambusch. We'd worked in churches of his in Florida. And he asked that we renovate Trinity, which we did.
So maybe I could read a quote from 1977 of Paul Goldberger, who wrote, "Rambusch and Company, the firm of architectural doctors who have ministered to the needs of New York's aging buildings for generations, removed layer after layer of paint to find colors that it believes are original. So what Rambusch has really done is restore Upjohn's illusion. Its architect wanted the church to look and feel Gothic, and again it does. The Rambusch's firm also includes a new, almost hidden lighting system set into the ceiling that can brighten the nave enough to permit television broadcasts. When it is dim, however, the depths of all the clean details returns. The room feels quieter. The light nestles softly in the vaults and washes in gracefully through the clear stories. It should always be this way. When Trinity is softly lit, the mystery that is critical to a Gothic church returns."
That's wonderful, isn't it? So I was very pleased with that statement that Paul made. So we moved the sanctuary forward. It was 1 bay deep, and we made it 2 bays deep, a bay from column to column. So it was, let's say, maybe the chancel was maybe 14 feet deep, and now it becomes 28 feet deep. An altar is brought out from the Asta Reredos. I mean, the Asta Reredos is left alone. But then the place where celebration takes place is no longer there at the Asta Reredos altar, but there's a freestanding altar now. And we did the lighting and the decorative painting, and then a new pulpit, which would hang on the column. They wanted it to be more elevated. And there is a job that has 2 generations, because we did that project in 77, 78, 79, and now Edwin has just, about a year or 2 ago, relighted it and put the lanterns in. So that's 2 generations.
We put in lanterns, we put in recessed fixtures, we renovated and restored the fixtures in the side chapel, which were quite stunning. Those are always the fun things. Someone said, "Oh, it's just black paint, we'll just leave it painted." I said, "It looks rather ornate, and I think we should maybe strip it away." And it was a 3-color tone finish of gold, silver, and wrought metal that they were very happy to bring back because someone had just painted over it. So this will get a little emotional. So here's the book. The book is written by my mother. So you want to say a few words?
Sure, because I think she's our mother. She's my wife, his mother. But she also was an archivist and worked with a group of young men who were interested in where the drawings for this building and that building. This is back in, let's say, the early 70s. And she helped them to organize their effort through the Architectural League. And then New York State found out what she was doing and said, "Oh, well, we'll hire you to work on the archives of the architectural drawings of New York State buildings." And they hired her and were paying her. And within a few months, the National AIA said, "Oh, we need the archives for the country. We'll start up COPAR, the Committee for the Preservation of Architectural Documentation." So she became the director of COPAR. She also had the talent to be able to raise funds, so she went to the National Endowment for the Humanities and so forth and got hundreds of thousands of dollars. And Capelin, I think, gave some money at one point. Is that right, Joan? So, yes?
She's not sure.
Yes, she's shaking her head, yes, I'm sure. And so Catha ran that. She went to Paris, to UNESCO, and worked on creating an international congress for architectural drawings in museums. They organized meetings, the first one in Helsinki, which your mother went to, and then others in Amsterdam and so forth. And so she was very active in the international scene, on the national scene. AIA gave her a silver medal for her work, and it became too big for Catha. Catha had her office in the National Arts Club, which is near our apartment, so she could walk over there. And I had a secretary who did the secretarial work, and had several young men as interns who went on to find jobs. And then it went to the Library of Congress. So COPAR is now in the Library of Congress as a department or section of HABS. So HABS was, architects here know, it was founded during the Depression for make work for architects. So they were hired to go and measure buildings, historic buildings, and there were no drawings of Mount Vernon. They would go to Mount Vernon and make drawings of it, and the federal government would pay for that. And so HABS grew and grew into a tremendous deposit, and then COPAR was merged into that because there's money there than the Library of Congress, and they had big supercomputers. And then she went out to become the director of the Catalog of Landscape Records up at Wade Hill. But then where do we go from here?
So we'll use that to say that she helped structure us. So what we're going to talk a little bit about here is the structure of the book, which is generated into 10 different chapters: theater, state capitals, art, metalwork, etc. And really the structure of the book takes direction from our factory, which was 7 different stories.
Yeah.
So we're going to get tight for time.
Okay, well, give me a 3-minute warning and I'll stop you because you have to talk. Well,
You're good.
You've got to realize the first 100 years ended in 1898 and the company is going full blast today. And you've got to know about the torch with the Statue of Liberty and great jobs they've done. But anyway, here's our building. We were in the building for 50 years. You'd go in the door, the elevator operator would take you to the 4th floor to the office. The office is where the project managers were and where the accounting was. And then depending upon what you wanted to do or your interests, you could go up with, let's say, one of the project directors to the design room, which was on 5. And there was a group from most of the years of 15 to 20 people, about half working in crafts, meaning the art metal and the painted decoration and the lighting, and about the other half about the lighting. So you had lighting designers, you had lighting engineers, you had drafts people, full-sizers, and that would be in the design room. If you went up one more floor, you'd have the stained glass shop. So the stained glass shop was on 6, and it was wonderful light. That building had windows on three sides, and there were no close neighbors. Manhattan woodworking was down only 3 stories high, so it was clear. And the stained glass was there on 6. The stained glass designers were separate from the rest of the designers, and they were on the front of 7. We had a great easel for painting and in the back of 7, and then there was mural department was in the back there. Downstairs, originally there was a wood shop, and then the lighting and art metal were on basement 1 and 2. There was one forge came when we moved in here in 47. They still had a working iron forge. At its earlier, when we were on, the shop was on 48th Street, we had 3 blacksmiths going as well as coppersmiths. When the wood shop moved, the lighting was growing and expanding, and so they moved right on up there. That's the, shall we go to the next?
Sure.
On the table of
Table of contents?
The table of contents. So you have chapter 1, the introduction, then you have 4 chapters on the 4 shops. The painting and decorating shop merges in or evolves into a design studio interested in liturgical furniture and sacred art. You could say mosaics and statuary, and that those designers who could create the environments in the church moved into doing more of the furnishings. Then after those first 4 shops, you have 7 chapters on theaters, hotels, restaurants, World Fair, World War II, and so forth, and restoration work. In the 60s, restoration, thanks to Catha, who studied not only at Smith and got her master's at NYU, but she went to Winterthur, the museum, studied American decorative arts and proper handling of American decorative arts, restoration. And so the firm moved in that direction, and it was a bit of an effort because the powers that be felt that a second-class shop does the restoration work. A first-class shop creates new windows. They don't restore old windows. They create new ones, and that's the right thing to do. And so restoration work was something lower down. But starting in the 70s, we started doing fine restoration work. And I think that's where you are.
So we're going to start to move a little quickly here. So we've tried to select a couple different projects because it has some interesting things. What's quite spectacular about the city is although it's ever evolving, there are little places that are left alone. So this is St. Patrick's Roman Catholic Church in Bayshore, New York.
In Bayshore, Long Island.
Long Island, which is part of New York. And 1919, this is a decorative paint scheme that we installed and remains in place today. So
Yeah, that we executed in fresco. So that's painting on wet plaster. We had the skills to paint on wet plaster, and today it's perfect. You just have to dust it, and it stands up just marvelously well. That's not Frode, that's not a design of Frode, but there's another man a designer who came aboard, Mr. Vraw, and he was also studied at the Royal Academy in Copenhagen. Because Danish, Norwegian, I can remember when I first started in 46, the language on the scaffold was Scandinavian. And for instance, my father could come out on the job and go up on the scaffold to visit with the foreman and the decorator, and they would talk in Danish. And the brush hands who were local people helping, they didn't know what was going on. They could have a private conversation in Danish or Norwegian, Swedish. But that's the great thing about St. Patrick's in Bayshore is it's a fresco. I guess we got to keep going.
We do, sadly. So what's interesting is some of the terms that we've used along the way are ever evolving. In my generation, we would never like to say that we're a designer because we look to designers to give us an opportunity to work for them. So we say we're craftsmen, and that is an ever evolving word, which is a little delicate. Dad doesn't have to worry about that. I need to worry that we need the next job. And one of those things that's evolving, which is why we've chosen these 2 different images, is the cathedral in Hartford. There was an architect, and we encouraged them. My father was what we call in our business a sponsor. He was a person who was running the job and promoting the job and supervising the job. So he, as a sponsor, said, we would love to help design and fabricate a baldachin. So we designed and fabricated this baldachin with the oversight of the designer. So it was a symbiotic discussion. It was an active discussion, which sadly is not always present today. And I chose a similar project for the Utah State Capitol, where there was the beginning of the concept of the return of the craftsmen to be part of the design assist. The architect there, David Hart, felt that craftspeople knew more than they as architects and could bring great value to the project if they were embedded into the project early on. So I thought that was a nice thing. About a year and a half ago, for the beginning of our 125th, David came and gave a lecture on the concept of design assist and the return of craft. So I thought that was important. We'll move through two different projects here. One is the National Shrine, which Dad will talk to, because it's a project in which we have been there for 4 generations?
Three. Three. The bishops, the Catholic bishops, about 1905, 1908, thought that there should be a national Catholic cathedral, a national Catholic shrine. And so they decided, yes, let's build a national Catholic shrine to the Blessed Virgin, of course. They hired an architect, Charles McGinnis, a great church architect, and he came up with designs. And after World War I, they had enough funds to do the crypt. And the crypt is a beautiful place if ever you want to. It's out in Brookland, out North Capitol and on Michigan a bit. And it's Gustavino vaulting. It's the ceiling is no higher than, let's say, where these fixtures are. And it's a wonderful atmosphere. And Lafarge mosaics and in the apses, three apses. And we were asked to do the first chapel, the first side chapel, which is we did wonderful ironwork. If you go, and you should look, little roses and lilies hammered out of iron at the top of the grills, the gates, and nice decorative painting and sort of Byzantine style, because the rector and Charles McGinnis went to St. Mark's in Venice, and that was, of course, influenced by Hagia Sophia. So that was, in those days, important. And Stanford White built a Hagia Sophia type church on Madison Square for the Presbyterians. So, I mean, it was a style at that time. But this was a very modern Byzantine one. And we did that first chapel. Then when the Second World War was over, because they ran out of money during the Depression, for about 30 years, the whole job stopped. And then it picked up again, and McGinnis and Walsh built the great upper church. The corona fixtures were designed by Mr. Santos. He was an architect who had gone to the University of Syracuse School of Architecture, and had worked in an office, Bertram Goodhue's office. But now you see, Bertram Goodhue, I think he died, somebody can help me here, 1919. But the office kept going. Mr. Santos went to work for them in the mid-20s and worked with them, meeting the continuing office, finishing the Bertram Goodhue buildings. St. Thomas's on Fifth Avenue, St. Vincent Ferrer, etc. Others. The Lincoln State Capitol in Nebraska. He had some terrific projects. And then the Depression came, and Mr. Santos moved over to Rambusch and worked for Rambusch for about 40 years. And he designed these corona fixtures in the shrine. The architect, McGinnis, was very sensitive to the light coming in and asked if he could work with our lead designer, Stephen Bridges. And they worked out windows that had a somewhat of an alabaster feel to them, and selected glass that would light the church in a certain way. And so we did those 3 great rose windows. And we gold leaf, the sacristy, and Leandro. And then I guess what you were getting to is there was an international competition. So then the work stopped around the end of the end of the 60s, and they ran out of money again for 20 years. Then they got going again, and they decided to finish the mosaics in the two nave domes and the great dome, and they had an international competition. They sent out requests for proposals to about 30 different firms, and got back, well, to many, and they got back about 22 applications. They were rather stringent. They selected 3 to proceed, and they had an award of $5,000 to the 2 runner-ups and $10,000 to the winner of the competition. But the winner of the competition was alerted, and we won the competition, happily, was alerted that that didn't mean you were going to get the job. That just meant that you won the competition, you got the $10,000 for your effort. And they owned those sketches, and they had the right to pick and choose ideas out of those 3 sketches and proceed. And there's a committee there that controls design. And so we went forward and we did first the Incarnation Dome, and then the Nativity Dome. That's where you came in. And then Martin
I did Incarnation and Nativity, and my brother
and
did
then
the
here is the great Trinity Dome with, you can get the scale of the figures. There's somebody standing there, and you can see how big the Christ figure and the Godfather figures are. Huge! The dome, it's a hemisphere, and it's 89 feet across in diameter. Could be I don't know the size of the Catha dome, but very big. Okay,
So let's go, because we're gonna get to some questions. So I'm gonna select a few projects here and move through them rapidly. We've selected the Church of
we
St.
could say that Edwin and Martin came into the firm. Edwin went to Bates and then got his master's degree in illumination from Parsons. Martin came into the firm from Tulane and got his master's degree from Columbia School of Architecture in historic preservation. So they're both documented. Go ahead.
So it means we have a degree.
Yeah, well,
But
it counts.
But at the end of the day, we feel the better presentation is we're vendors, we're educated vendors, and we can move our way through. But in this case, St. Raymond's in the Bronx, where there is work for 4 generations. The apse dome remains. The baldachin over the altar is from my grandfather and his brother. My father did the lighting and the renovation, and he and I did the floor and the work here. Unstated is around 1980, 1990, our decorative paint company ended, and we then started to work with friends such as Jeff Green. This is the first project we worked with Jeff and his group here, and we're working again with them, which is wonderful, because at the end of the day, we're shaping and creating visual environments that are supportive of the person's experience in the environment. 1904, the raw light bulb was too bright. It created glare. It destroyed the environment. The challenge is still today. It's just different words and different technology. And it's always a pleasure when we're invited back to be in a space 1, 2, 3, sometimes more times. The next one, again, is it wouldn't seem I'm promoting Jeff today, is the Empire State Building. Again, Life Neandris did the painting and decorating. Albert Tolk, who was a muralist of Rambusch, did the mural of this, the skyscraper of New York City in the 30s when the building was first built. And we made a lighting fixture that had been designed but never carried out in a design assist with the architect Buyer Blenderbell there. The World's Fair, I believe we worked in 50 plus pavilions.
Oh, we had over 200 men working somehow or other.
Yeah.
Yes, we worked, as I said, with Hildreth Mier in the medical arts mural that was on the outside with the dragon. We worked with Walter Owen Teague in the Ford building. We made 3 maps that were united So we made, he came up with the idea, but then we developed and did the shop drawings and executed columns 20 feet high with 3 sides. And on those first side were the roads of 1909. The column would turn a third, and now you'd have the roads of 1939, and then the column would move a third. So you have triangular columns, and you have the 3 different eras of roads, and we had to guarantee that that would work noiselessly without stopping for 2 years. And we also made a big engine, a cross-section through an engine, with the pistons that would go and all of that, and that was also noiseless. So what we got Ford to agree to is that we would maintain a staff ready to move, and we would have it fixed within 30 hours. So as long as we did that for 2 years, we always knew there was this little team of 3 or 4 guys in the metal shop who could get right out there, and we had their phone numbers, and we were ready to guarantee it.
So this is a fun painting that my brother and I like. So during the war work, not only did we do radar screens and other things for Sperry Rand, we also painted airfields and camouflaged them from above, and some wonderful things. So I apologize, we're going to go a little fast because I think we should touch on a few different things. This is the Getty Decorative Arts Museum, which is about 25 years old, and it was generated by a lighting designer named Howard Branston. And his quote is, "I developed a new luminaire to approximate the intimacy of candlelight using high-tech means, without sacrificing the clarity needed by scholars and antiquarians. Rambusch collaborated with me to make this conceptual design and build this unique luminaire. The end result is, I believe, an important breakthrough in museum lighting, an infinitely flexible system offering wall wash, downlighting, and accent lighting, variable beam pattern and UL protected, all focused through one minuscule aperture." So this was sort of the concept of working with people and trying to be innovative, whether it's the 3 rotating pillars in the World's Fair. It's that challenge which comes forward. The torch of the Statue of Liberty, which my brother was involved in, was a challenge that's actually pleasurable. People wanted to renovate it, they wanted to fix it, but they didn't know what that meant because there was no specification. So we spent about 2 years visually and verbally validating for them what that meant. So we said we'd like to create the torch as it was viewed at that time, in color and lamp and location. Then they became highly distracted because they could realize with LED you could change colors. So we were sent out to the torch for women's suffrage to change all the color to purple for a day. And then they got the bill and they said, we'll leave it yellow. And you went through that. But the challenge is to educate, to provide knowledge, and push the boundaries to do something beautiful. And as I said earlier, and we have to be discreet with it, we think of the building almost as much as the client as the architect and the owner of the building, because you want to preserve it and maintain it and bring it life forward. This is sort of a sad but appropriate story of the Fireman's Monument down at Ground Zero. It was the only monument for years, and it was the only place the American flag flew for years. And it's the actions and tactics of the Fire Department of the City of New York, not OSHA, Fire Department of the City of New York, with the only accurately spelled name and list of the 343 active men on the roll who were killed that day. So it's quite beautiful, and we made the lights too. They didn't quite understand that. They said, you did the statue. I said, we're making the lights. So where are you buying them from? I said, we're making them in Jersey City. So it was a little bit of fun. So the last slide is a little bit about some 38 projects that we selected for the map of the City of New York. And then the last is the promotion, if you so choose the book. And I sadly have 7 to 10 minutes for questions.
Thank you so much. That was just a fantastic celebration of craftsmanship and the Rambushes. So really, thank you so much. And maybe we can stretch the 7 minutes on the questions, because I'm sure people have plenty, because my goodness, you have touched so many projects. But before we start the questions, I just want to take the opportunity to acknowledge the other Rambusch in the room, the other Rambusch who's active still in the company, and that would be Martin, for people who do not know him. Martin, could you stand up?
It takes two of us to make up for this, right?
And we'd now like to open the floor for questions, and I see the gentleman over here, and also to remind our online audience that you could submit a question to Meg, and she will pass it on to me as soon as I get my phone.
The 13th Street building is pretty distinctive. Did you have something to do with the design and building of the building you occupied on 13th Street?
We didn't have to do with the design. That's a very interesting building. Probably right after the Civil War, Medetta Creek was put in a culvert. And the culvert, Medetta Creek, diagonally went across that property. So the building is, there are two triangular buildings there, one on the left side of Medetta Creek and the other one on the right side. And then when we bought both buildings, we squared off the property. So that's where the odd shape comes from. The building was built by Shook, was the architect, and it was built for an Irishman and a German who were firemen, meaning they stoked the furnace to provide heat in the building. And they were down on Spring Street, and they worked out a system of controlling the heat so it would go through the building, and valves and whatnot. And they started selling that equipment to control the heat, and so they built that building as a factory. And that's how the building got originally built by architect Shook. And then they moved to New Jersey, and it became, in the 20s, a bookbinder's building. So all the bookbinders, many different bookbinders were in the building from the 20s till we bought it. And we bought it in 46, right?
So I have a question about the types of craftsmen and artisans you would have been employing in the first 100 years, and have some of those craftsmen, the type of crafts, still maintained in Rambusch today? And then one other question: the drawings that you guys produce for your jobs when you're initially doing a proposal, are you still hand rendering jobs, or are you using more modern computer drawing at this point? Thank you.
I can take those. So my wife called Rambusch the United Nations. We have originally are heavily staffed by Scandinavians, both in the design room and in the shops. Then in the 20s, it was more Italians coming in and Jewish people. And then after the war, and still we have people from Eastern Europe and many people from the Caribbean. So it evolved, and we shouldn't put the design group short. Edwin and Martin's design group that they have now at this moment is United Nations. You have a fantastic Jim Hassler in the lighting. He's from England and learned the lighting fixture business there, and then had an interesting career and has been with us now for 20 years. Then we have a designer who I believe a graduate architect from Lviv in the Ukraine, and another one from Eastern Europe. And then we have a very clever Korean who graduated from Parsons. And down in the glass shop, there's a young lady from Ireland. So it's still, whether it's a design group or the craftspeople, it's still a United Nation.
So we start with hand drawing, scale hand drawing, and then depending upon the means and method of fabrication, you might move to a CAD drawing from which you could water jet or incorporate castings and other things based on the budget of the project and the scope of the work. And the other answer is the accessibility, to be cynical. I haven't had a glass of wine, so I can be cynical before that. The availability of talent from Europe has dramatically been affected by the EU. And the youth people of Europe don't find it necessary to come to America to find the American dream. So it's harder and harder to find European craftspeople. You're always on the lookout. You're always running the paper in the German paper and the Polish paper and the Ukrainian paper. And you're always running those ads, but it's hard to find people. As is a lot of the youth, the concept of labor and hard work is not always present. How about we leave it there? But I think the last count, we had people from 12 different nations who are working with us. Around 2008, when we were doing the Utah State Capitol, we had people from 20 different nations. So it's ever changing, and you have to be flexible according to what that is. And some people don't want to work full-time, they prefer to work part-time, so you have to be flexible to what that is. So hopefully I've answered your question.
Yes, well, it's certainly truly international. This is from a question from Jill online. Can you visit the workshop?
Sure. So I had a testy conversation with someone recently. Many people don't want you to come to their shop, A, because they feel they might be revealed. The other is liability. So, I mean, they're going to ask you to come in and you're going to put on a special helmet and a special set of goggles and a special set of shoes. Within reason, if you are able-bodied, we're willing to have you walk. I did go to a church in Natchez, Mississippi. I said, I see you have a Henry Frink fixture from 1912. I would love to go up into the attic and look at it. And they said, oh, Mr. Rambusch, you need to speak to my lawyer. I said, I just want to get in the attic and look around. Can I get there? Oh, no, I'm sorry, Mr. Rambusch, you can't do that. So I said, well, get me the letter, I'll sign it, and I'll do what you need. So I showed up, and they go, oh, we thought you were much older. You're more than welcome to go. But, so within reason, we run an open shop.
Any more questions? Okay, I see a gentleman over here. No, actually, sir, because it's being recorded and we have an online audience and we don't want them to miss hearing your question.
My question is, do you work with sound engineers? Do you ever we're worried about light and visual and the aesthetics and textures and all these things, but what about sound?
Do you want to take that?
We can both go.
Well, you go ahead.
So the answer is you never give a recommendation unless you're comfortable with the person you're recommending. So there are only one or two sound people we feel who are capable of that. And within those circumstances, we try to provide a reference. But we are not sound engineers, just like sound engineers are not lighting engineers, et cetera. So you'd like to be careful how that moves, and you usually provide a careful response of what their quality is and what they can provide. So yes, there are 2 or 3 fine people in the country who do that, but we only give a reference for that. And usually we'll give 2, never 1.
But you're right, that sound is very important in the creation of the environment. And such things as the texture of the ceiling and the texture of the walls and what you do with it, I mean, how you cover them is critical to the sound, and it's critical to the design and the color.
Right, any more questions? Actually, I think I might have an online question coming in. I'll go over there. But as I walk over, let me read out this question. Can you talk about your impressions of the future for the crafts and craftsmanship in your field? And that's from Robert online. Sorry, did you get that? I was just difficult. Yes.
Well, somehow or other craftspeople survive. I mean, it's just a wonderful thing to be making things in iron, making things in glass, and maybe the idea of apprenticeship, which is a wonderful thing, is not popular because young people don't want to be told what to do and have to sign a contract for 4 years. We had apprentices in the system up until through the 50s. The Millards came in, Mr. Millard Sr. came in with his twin boys around 1955. He was a decorative painter, and he taught at the Union School for Decorative Painting. And he said, I would like to have my 2 sons apprentice in your paint shop. And Dad said, we'd love to have them, but we won't have them both in the same shop. One can be in the painting and decorating shop, and one can be in the stained glass studio. So they have to pick which is which. But they didn't want these 2 boys sort of in the same place. So, we had apprentices through the system. Young people don't seem to want to do that. And this break of craftsmanship being part of design and build is not as unified as it used to be. And we're sort of fighting uphill at Rambusch,
Right.
where the designer, I mean, Jim Hassler, even to this day, can walk down and say, hey, to the guys making the fixtures that he designed last week, I want it this way or that way. Or the craftspeople can go up to Jim Hassler and say, well, what did you do today? We don't understand what you're doing here. And so there's an intimacy between the designers and the workers in the shops and lighting, which is good.
Most of you have been in New York for a while, so there was a great saying from Cy Sims, an educated buyer is our best consumer. And so I think the future of craft and beautiful objects through historic preservation or other things like that is someone being knowledgeable about something that's good and preserving that. And that also has to be tied to a value. And you can't do beautiful things for a less than appropriate value. And we struggle with some of our institutions which have more money than anyone we know, and they're purchasing work on a low bid basis, and that's not good for anybody. That means you're probably choosing the person who made the most amount of mistakes on his bid. So the result is you're going to damage something that can't be replaced. So that's why you should be educated to what's involved.
Right.
And that's probably why we're a small company, because we're opinionated.
I'm going to take the next question, but Viggo, your answer made me think of something. 2 brothers working together. Now, obviously, Edwin, you and Martin took slightly different degree courses and were informed in different ways, but how did that actually work within the company? Did you both gravitate to different fields within the company, or has it always been a shared partnership?
It's been a shared partnership. We're both 50% owners. I studied art history and economics. And so I found myself more drawn to lighting and environments, and Martin was the Artist of the Year at Tulane Sophie Newcomb for hot glass sculpture. And so he moved more towards the artistic end in hot and glass, cold glass, and liturgical environments. So it worked out pretty well. I think that was my dad's best sale.
Do you find that you have much to do with the Landmark Preservation Commission here in New York and other places? And how does that landmark preservation, and how does that work with what you do? I find them irritating.
Well, thank you for positioning yourself there, and then we can answer that. We actually struggle with what the definition of the job is. Is it conservation? Is it restoration? Is it renovation? What is the expectation of the owner? And you have to be nimble enough early on to understand what that means. And I became very aware of 10 years ago that there are huge tax credits tied to conservation. And if you want to restore something down to the little, Q-tip, and they get $50 million for their building, I'm happy to do it for you. But you also have to get there in the right way. So you need to find people who are willing to establish what are the credentials of the people carrying out that work, so that you come back to a validated scope. So we have been involved in landscape, on conservation and landmarks. Usually that's driven by the project, not by us. And we may come in underneath as a team member for those different scopes. Hopefully I've answered you. Yeah.
I have a question for both of you. So, did you feel pressure to go into business with your father?
Well, I could say that I didn't commit when I was going off to college. So I went to a liberal arts college. And coming out, I thought, well, maybe I'd go in the State Department. I was very interested in foreign service. And I wrote a letter to my grandfather. And he was the Consul General of Denmark here in New York, and my uncle was my mother's cousin was the ambassador from Denmark to Washington. And that's all a big, long story. And I wrote him that I was debating between these two careers. He was retired in Denmark. He saved the letter and gave it to my mother, so we still have it. And he wrote me back, and he said, a diplomat is nothing but a puppet on the end of a string. That there is no dignity in being a diplomat. This is a diplomat who spent his life in the diplomatic corps. And he said, you have the opportunity to be your own boss. And I think that's a much nobler life, to be your own boss.
What a great answer.
And you see, he had a terrible time because Denmark was invaded by the Nazis. And then the two of them were, my grandfather and my uncle, they were recalled instantly, within hours of the Germans taking over Denmark. They had to go back. Well, they didn't do it. They stayed here. As I said, it's a very interesting and long story. But they stayed here, but they were condemned. They lost their pensions when, after the war, they were disobedient members of the Foreign Service. And it took years before the country came around and realized that Denmark had some heroes, such as the people who didn't go back, and the people who fought. Yeah. And you have...
So my father called us in February at 8 o'clock in the morning, which was a tradition on Sundays, which usually was after a long night in the library. And he said, just so you know, there's no place for you here. So you better circulate your resume and get a job. And then about 4 months later, he said, if you'd like to write an application to me, I would consider it. And I think the beauty of it is you are able to do a lot of different things, and you are not limited to one. So you're able to do marketing and sales and other different things like that. And we've been given a long time ago the flexibility, and my father gave us the business. So It wasn't sold to us, it was given to us, and that was great, a great token for us. So
How wonderful. Now, this would be a good note to conclude, but I'm going to take two more questions, and we'll just ask for very short answers and short questions.
Yes,
so
no.
Gentleman over here, who was the gentleman? Okay, this will be our last in-person question, and then we'll have an online.
You mentioned earlier Abramowitz. I assume that became the firm Harrison and Abramowitz, who was, I recall, Rockefeller Family Foundation architects.
Right.
And they eventually did Lincoln Center.
Right.
Did you do any work at Lincoln Center, or was that too stark for any embellishment?
Well, yes and no. The crystal chandeliers in the Opera House were designed by Mr. Roth in Vienna. And then he built them, you could say, and sent them over in boxes of crystal and boxes of arms and boxes of this, that, and the other thing in drawings. So it was a jigsaw puzzle, if you want, and it came to our shops, and we had the job, and we were very happy to have the job of sorting it all out and then wiring it for American standards, for electrical testing laboratory, and we wired them and delivered finished crystal chandeliers wired so that they could be installed. So that's the Opera House. You mentioned Abramovich. Max called, Mr. Abramovich, Max, called one time, I can remember, we got a problem. Oh, what? So it wasn't my problem. Anyway, I went up there, and people were walking into the glass walls, and Max had the Philharmonic Hall, and Wally Harrison had the Opera House, right? So he had this problem. What are we going to do with people walking into the glass walls? And he was thinking of sandblasting. Could we do that? And then we had a conversation on that, but we didn't do any work there. He put decals on the windows to begin with, and I guess people got used to it. I don't think there's any sandblasted on those glass walls. The exterior walls of the ground floor.
Right, well, this is probably an unfair question to conclude because you could probably devote your whole lecture to this question, but I'm going to ask you to give a very quick summary to this. Okay, and here it is. Please tell us how you approach and develop the conceptual ecclesiastical interior design of a church, i.e. a painting scheme, for instance, St. Raymond's, and that's from Carlos.
The which?
St. Raymond's?
St. Raymond's.
Yes, but as I said, I know that's a very complicated and long question, so...
No, I'll make it short. My grandfather was very interested in, let's call it Byzantine art, and there was a Romanesque building, and it called for Byzantine, and he designed the seat of Christ on a cushion with everything else around it. So he just applied his technical knowledge and made sketches, and the clergy accepted it.
Perfect. Thank you so much. What a truly fabulous talk. I have to say that we are honored to have you here. Your contribution to the craftsmanship, not just of New York City, but to the country, your wonderful family firm, it really is. We're so delighted we had this opportunity to celebrate with you. And of course, your book, your wonderful book, is also part of this celebration. Victoria, would you like to say a few words?
I will. I'll be brief, but it's kind of hard to be brief with people I've really come to love because this family is so special. And Viggo, I met you 20 years ago here And I wasn't working here at the time. I had just become a member, and it was the Craftsmanship Awards. But I did not know that we would become such great friends, and I learned so much about the family. And there's no wonder why this firm has lasted 4 generations. It's a tough thing to do, to carry it through so beautifully, the discipline, the intelligence, the elegant nature of the firm, and as I was asked to do a quote, and I took my assignment. Well, actually, Barbara Christensen said, Victoria, you took it too seriously. I'm like, okay, I went to 12 years of Catholic school, and she said I got a gold star because I read every page. And I now have a confession, and really it's a confession because I went through it on Good Friday, and I never do anything on Good Friday. But I said, this is the Rambushes, so I'm going to do what I have to do to come in on time with this. So, and I do want to say something about Catha, because, Catha, every detail of this book, and even as time was moving on for Catha, and she was the inside cover, the details, wanting to see everything. She saw it through till the end. And one of the most beautiful moments that I heard about was Catha, and Viggo, I hope you don't mind, but, she was going to have to go to the doctor, but she said, I'll do it at the end of the week. And Viggo, you said something like, well, why the end of the week? She said, because it's the end of the work week. I mean, it just says everything about the dignity and the discipline, the dedication to seeing this through. And they did see it through. I have to say, knowing book publishing, I said, how could it be that they're going to do this? But I couldn't believe it when they said the book's ready. There was Viggo pushing and writing, and wow, so spectacular. Thank you. Glorious tribute to the art of craftsmanship. I hope everybody looks. I couldn't believe how many areas here that that their hands touched. And here's to many, many more years and the best of success to Rambusch. Thank you, and God bless you. Thank you.
Absolutely, and really, as Victoria said, in memory of your wonderful wife and mother, in memory of Catha Rambusch. Anyway, we're just thrilled and honored for you to be here. Thanks to you, we're going to have this wonderful spread of cheese and wine, and I hope our in-person audience will stay, and of course, purchase some books. Our next lecture will be on Art Deco in June. Please come back. Thank you so much to our in-person and online audience for attending tonight. Thank you.